Welcome to NOCTURNALEDGERL. There are places in this world that the maps try to forget. There are coordinates that, despite being etched into the geography of a nation, feel as though they have been excised from reality itself, leaving behind a scar that refuses to heal. We often look to the ancient castles of Europe or the bloody battlefields of America for our tales of the supernatural. But true horror, the kind that seeps into the marrow of your bones and turns your blood to ice, often resides in the places where humanity was meant to be healed, but was instead broken. Tonight, we turn our gaze to the Far East, to the mist-shrouded hills of Gwangju, South Korea. We are peeling back the rusted layers of history to expose the rotting heart of the Namhansan-seong Neurological Hospital, better known to the world and to the terrified locals who refuse to walk near its shadow as the Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital. This is not a campfire tale spun from thin air. This is a narrative built upon the cracked foundations of documented history, police reports, the testimony of urban explorers who returned, changed, and the chilling silence left behind by those who did not. This is the story of a building that CNN once labeled one of the 7 freakiest places on the planet, a distinction earned not through marketing, but through a legacy of suffering so profound it reportedly tore a hole in the veil between the living and the dead. To understand the monster, we must first understand its birth. The year was 1982. South Korea was undergoing rapid modernization, a tiger economy clawing its way onto the global stage. In the fervor of development, the need for institutions to house the mentally ill, the elderly with dementia, and the unwanted fringes of society grew desperate. It was in this climate that the Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital opened its doors. Situated on a hillside, isolated by a dense forest that seemed to swallow the sunlight long before dusk, the facility was a concrete behemoth. It was designed to be a sanctuary, a place of order and medicine. But from the very beginning, there was something amiss in the geometry of the place, a coldness that the boiler rooms could never quite banish. For over a decade, the hospital operated behind a veil of professional secrecy. Doctors in white coats walked the terrazzo floors, nurses administered heavy sedatives, and the patients existed in the drug-induced twilight of 1980s psychiatric care. But then, in 1996, the heartbeat of the hospital stopped. The doors were locked, the windows were boarded up, the staff vanished, and the patients were transferred away in a chaotic exodus that left half their belongings behind. The official story, the one typed into municipal records and recited by skeptics, is mundane. They say it was a matter of economics and sanitation. They claim that the hospital's sewage treatment system was failing, leaking filth into the local water supply, and that the owner, faced with insurmountable government fines and a revocation of his license, chose to flee the country, leaving the building to rot, rather than pay for the upgrades. It is a clean, bureaucratic explanation. It makes sense on paper. But paper cannot explain the screams that neighbors heard echoing from the hills at 3 in the morning, long after the electricity had been cut. Paper cannot explain why the equipment left behind wasn't sold, but abandoned, as if it were contaminated by something far worse than bacteria. Let us walk together now, in our minds, up that overgrown path leading to the entrance. Imagine it is late autumn. The air in Gwangju is crisp, carrying the scent of pine and decaying leaves. The road to Gonjiam is not welcoming. It is barred by rusted iron gates, wrapped in barbed wire that looks like the thorns of some metallic briar. Signs explicitly forbid entry, warning of structural instability and legal consequences. But these signs are covered in graffiti, the desperate scrawls of hundreds of thrill-seekers who felt the pull of the void. As you cross the threshold, the first thing that hits you is the silence. It is not the peaceful silence of a library, but the heavy, oppressive silence of a predator holding its breath. The building looms ahead, a gray, 3-story skeleton stripped of its dignity. The windows are like empty eye sockets, staring blankly back at you, Moss has claimed the exterior walls, creeping up the concrete like a slow-motion infection. When you step into the lobby, the temperature drops. This is a phenomenon reported by almost every single investigator who has dared to enter Gonjiam. It is not merely a draft. It is a sudden, physical plunge in temperature that defies the ambient weather. It is the sensation of walking into a meat locker. Your breath begins to mist in the air. The smell is overwhelming. It is a bouquet of rot damp plaster, disintegrating paper, rusted metal, and underneath it all, a faint, sickly sweet copper tang that reminds you of dried blood. The interior of Gonjiam is a time capsule of 1996, frozen in the moment of its death. This is one of the most unsettling aspects of the location. When a business closes, usually the assets are liquidated. Desks are moved, expensive medical devices are sold, files are archived. Here, it looks as though the rapture occurred. In the reception area, calendars still hang on the wall, the days of July 1996 marked off with red pen until they simply stop. White coats hang on hooks, gathering dust for nearly 3 decades. Patient records, sensitive documents that should have been shredded or secured, lie scattered across the floor. The ink fading, but the names still legible, a violation of privacy that continues from beyond the grave. As you move deeper into the corridors, the layout of the hospital begins to feel labyrinthine. The architects designed long, straight hallways for efficiency. But in the decay, they have become tunnels of darkness. Flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing peeling paint that hangs from the ceiling in sheets, looking remarkably like dead skin shedding from a corpse. The floor is littered with debris, broken glass, shattered ceiling tiles, and the inexplicable presence of personal items. A singular shoe, a hairbrush, a photograph of a smiling family, face down in the dirt. The legends surrounding the hospital's closure are far darker than the sewage report. The local folklore, whispered by the elders in the nearby village, speaks of the director. They say he was a man of science who slowly succumbed to the very madness he was meant to treat. The rumors claim that the death rate at Gonjiam was statistically impossible. Patients didn't just die of old age or complications. They died of sudden heart failure, unexplained trauma, and suicides that didn't make sense. The story goes that the director began to experiment on the patients, using them as conduits for something esoteric, something dark. When the spirits of the tormented began to push back, when the haunting became too physical to ignore, the director fled to America, not to escape fines, but to escape the retribution of the dead. This narrative is bolstered by the physical evidence found in the treatment rooms. Explorers have documented finding shock therapy equipment that looks medieval in its construction. Straitjackets, stiff with age and mold, have been found in piles in the corners of rooms. The psychological weight of seeing these objects is immense. You can almost hear the phantom echoes of the struggles that took place here. The fabric of the straitjackets holds the memory of frantic movement, of muscles straining against restraint, of a terror that had no voice. One of the most notorious locations within the hospital is the shower room. Water, in paranormal theory, is often cited as a conductor for spiritual energy. The shower room at Gonjiam is a place where many claim to feel an overwhelming sense of sadness and panic. The tiles are cracked and stained with rust that looks uncomfortably like dried arterial spray. Visitors have reported hearing the sound of dripping water, a steady, rhythmic plip, 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 even though the pipes have been dry for 30 years. Some have reported seeing a shadow, a dark mass that stands in the corner of the room, darker than the surrounding night, watching. It doesn't move. It doesn't scream. It just observes, radiating a malice that makes your stomach churn. But if the shower room is a place of sadness, room 402 is the heart of the darkness. Located on the intensive care floor, room 402 has become the holy grail for ghost hunters and the epicenter of the Gonjiam legend. For years, the door to room 402 was locked. Not just locked, but jammed shut, fused by rust and perhaps something else. While every other door in the facility could be kicked open or had rotted off its hinges, the door to 402 remained impassable. The lore states that room 402 was the intensive care unit where the most violent, most disturbed, and most abused patients were kept. It is said that the curse is strongest here. Those who try to force the door open report equipment failure. Fully charged camera batteries drain to zero in seconds. High-end audio recorders capture nothing but static, or more terrifyingly, high-pitched frequencies that cause physical pain to the human ear. There are accounts of explorers who managed to pry the door open only a few inches, just enough to peek inside. They speak of a void, not just an empty room, but a space where the light from their flashlights seems to be absorbed rather than reflected. They describe a sudden, crushing pressure on their chests, difficulty breathing, and an overwhelming instinct to run, a primal fight-or-flight response triggered by a threat their eyes couldn't see but their biology recognized. Let us delve into the specific testimonies of those who trespassed here before the demolition. In the early 2000s, a group of university students from Seoul decided to document the hospital for a film project. This was long before the horror movie popularized the site, so their intentions were purely documentary. They entered at dusk. Their footage, which has never been officially released, but has been described on various forums, reportedly shows the group starting in high spirits. They are joking, laughing at the graffiti. But as they ascend to the second floor, the mood shifts. One of the students, a young woman we will call Jimin, began to complain of a headache. Not a dull ache, but a sharp, piercing pain behind her eyes. On the audio track of their recording, amidst the crunch of their footsteps, a sound was captured that none of them heard at the time. It was a low, guttural growl. It wasn't the sound of a dog or a wild animal. It sounded vocal, human, but distorted, as if spoken through a throat filled with fluid. As the group reached the third floor, they found the laboratory. Here, glass beakers and test tubes lay shattered. A calendar on the wall was flapping, despite there being no wind in the sealed corridor. Jimin froze. She claimed she couldn't move her legs. She wasn't paralyzed by fear in the metaphorical sense. She physically could not lift her feet from the floor. Her friends tried to pull her, and they described her weight as increasing, as if gravity had intensified only around her. Then, the door at the end of the hallway slammed shut. A heavy, metal fire door, rusted open for a decade, swung shut with a violence that shook the dust from the ceiling. The group panicked. They dragged Jimin, who was now weeping hysterically, out of the building. Years later, members of that group posted online that Jimin was never the same. She developed severe insomnia and claimed that whenever she closed her eyes, she was back in that hallway, and she could feel cold fingers wrapping around her ankles. This is a recurring theme in the Gonjiam narrative, the attachment. The idea that you don't just visit the hospital, you take a piece of it home with you, or rather, it follows you. We must also consider the documented evidence from professional paranormal investigators. Unlike thrill-seeking teenagers, these teams come equipped with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and spirit boxes. One prominent investigation team recorded a thermal anomaly in the main hallway. The ambient temperature was roughly 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Suddenly, the thermal camera picked up a heat signature. It was roughly the height of a human, but it was misshapen, lacking defined limbs. It moved across the screen, passing through a solid concrete wall. At the exact moment the heat signature appeared, the EMF meter spiked to levels that would usually indicate a massive electrical current. Yet there was no electricity in the building for miles. Skeptics, of course, have their rebuttals. They argue that the feelings of dread are caused by infrasound. The wind blowing through the broken windows and the unique acoustic properties of the long, concrete corridors could create sound waves at a frequency below 20 Hz. Infrasound is known to cause feelings of awe, fear, anxiety, and even visual hallucinations in humans. It vibrates the fluid in the eyes, causing peripheral vision distortions that the brain interprets as ghosts. They argue that the headaches and nausea are symptoms of mold exposure. The building was damp, unventilated, and filled with black mold. Breathing in these spores for hours could easily cause the physical symptoms reported by explorers. And yet, science struggles to explain the shared hallucinations. How can four different people, standing in different parts of a room, all hear the exact same voice whispering a specific Korean name at the exact same time? How can a digital voice recorder capture a sentence that directly responds to a question asked by an investigator in a dialect that hasn't been commonly spoken in Gwangju for 50 years? There is also the matter of the director's office. Located on the top floor, this room was relatively untouched compared to the rest of the asylum. A heavy mahogany desk remained, along with bookshelves. It was here that many claimed to feel the most malevolent presence. One urban explorer, a man who had visited abandoned sites all over the world, from Chernobyl to the catacombs of Paris, wrote a blog post about his experience in the director's office. He described a feeling of being judged. He said he felt an intense burning sensation on his back. When he returned to his hotel and looked in the mirror, he found 3 long red scratches running diagonally across his shoulder blade. He had been wearing a thick winter jacket and 2 layers of shirts. The clothes were undamaged, but the skin beneath was marked. The terror of Gonjiam is not just in the jump scares or the spooky sounds. It is in the tragedy of the place. A psychiatric hospital is a repository of human misery. It is a place where the mind fractures, where reality dissolves for the patients. If we subscribe to the stone tape theory, the idea that intense emotional energy can be recorded onto the physical environment, like a magnetic tape, then Gonjiam is a symphony of suffering. The concrete walls, the iron bars, the terrazzo floors have absorbed decades of confusion, fear, betrayal, and pain. When we step into that space, we are not necessarily seeing ghosts in the traditional sense. We are replaying the recordings of the damned. We are walking through the echoes of 1,000 psychotic breaks. In 2018, the story of Gonjiam took a final, dramatic turn. The popularity of the horror film based on the location caused a surge in tourism. Thousands of people were breaking in, destroying fences, and disturbing the neighbors. The owner of the land, who had remained silent for years, finally decided that the liability was too great. The demolition order was signed. The excavators arrived. Watching the footage of the demolition is a surreal experience. The giant metal claws of the machines tore into the concrete that had stood for nearly 40 years. Walls that had witnessed unspeakable things crumbled into dust. The room where the calendar hung, the shower room with the dripping sounds, the impenetrable room 402, all of it was reduced to a pile of gray rubble. But this raises the most terrifying question of all. Can you bulldoze a curse? If the land itself is stained, does removing the building cleanse it? Or does it merely release whatever was trapped inside? There are reports from the construction crews who worked on the demolition. Whispers that machines would malfunction without cause, that tools would vanish and reappear in impossible places, that the workers felt eyes on them from the tree line, watching the destruction of the hive. Even now, with the hospital gone, the land remains an open wound. Locals still avoid the area at night. They say the wind there sounds different. They say that when the fog rolls down from the mountains, it takes the shape of the building that is no longer there, a phantom structure superimposed over the empty earth. The legacy of Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital is not just in the bricks and mortar. It is in the psychological scar it left on the psyche of South Korea. It represents the fear of the unknown, the fear of madness, and the fear that our institutions, the places designed to keep us safe, can become our prisons. It reminds us that there is a thin line between sanity and chaos, and that sometimes that line is as brittle as a rusted fence. As we conclude this deep dive, consider this. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. The kinetic energy of the screams, the potential energy of the fear, the electrical impulses of 1,000 firing synapses in distress. Where did it all go when the walls came down? Did it dissipate into the atmosphere? Or did it sink into the soil, waiting for the next structure to be built, waiting for new inhabitants to torment? You have been listening to NOCTURNALEDGERL. The hospital may be gone, but the ledger of its horrors remains open. The darkness does not disappear just because we turn on the lights. Sometimes, it just hides in the shadow cast by the bulb. Until next time, keep your eyes on the shadows and pray they don't look back.